Hello, hello, and welcome. It's so good to see you all. And boy, am I excited about this afternoon. We have a real treat. We're about to have a very juicy conversation. And before we jump in with our wonderful guest here, I just want to welcome you to this and explain a little bit about the genesis of stargazing. So at i.c.stars, as many of you know, we find talent, we train talent, and put talent to work in IT careers. And for over 20 years, we've been doing this great work. And the few things that I want to share with you that I'm particularly proud of is that, we have a 90% placement rate. The average earning increase is over 300%. But the metrics that I love to share are one, that we have over 60 homeowners in our alumni association. And what's more is our alums are buying homes in the communities that they came from, even if that means commuting an hour and a half to go to work in the suburbs. Because one of the questions that we asked was, what if we determine success not by getting out of the hood, but by investing back in? How would that change our community capital? And then the other metric that I'm really proud of is that over 57 businesses have been started by alums in our alumni association. And that means that our alums are starting businesses, they're hiring from the community, and not only are we a part of the economic mainstream, we're a part of making the economic mainstream. So I'm super proud of all of those things. And when we talk about leadership and technology, we're talking about how i.c.stars uses systems thinking to not only train folks to be great technologists and coders, but to also use that very same system thinking framework to develop leaders who will work to change the system, whether that's through advocacy, whether that's through business and starting new businesses, or whether that's through their civic engagement and working in the community and being visible. So, of course, we always have great technology speakers, as you know, and I can see some of our technology executives on the call. But we wanted to say, okay, what if we featured leaders who are outside of our traditional domain, who are outside of technology? How cool and inspiring would that be? And so we had this great idea. And today we have Dr. Mona Hanna-Attisha here with us, and we're so excited. And she's going to be interviewed by Yemisi Dinkins, an alum from Cycle. Oh, Yemisi, I'm going to mess this up. You have to tell me. 5. And I should have known that. It was on the tip of my tongue. Okay, 5, Cycle 5. And so just to give you context, we are currently getting ready to start Cycle 49. So Yemisi has been out of the i.c.stars studio for some time now. And just a little, I'll tell you a little bit about Yemisi, is that okay, yeah, there I am. Yemisi is currently overseeing fiscal operations across the 7th state of Illinois, operated by mental health centers. And previously, she was the director of finance and economic development at the West Side Health Authority. Yemisi has a BA in economics and management and received her master's in nonprofit business administration. And her time as an intern played a huge role in the trajectory of her personal and professional career. And Yemisi, I just got to say, I'm so proud of you. And then Dr. Mona, who we absolutely love, she is the founder and the director of the Michigan State University and Hurley Children's Hospital Pediatric Public Health Initiative. And it's an innovative and model public health program in Flint, Michigan. She is a pediatrician, a scientist, an activist, an author, and she's testified 4 times before the United States Congress and was awarded the Freedom of Expression Courage Award by PEN America. She was named one of Time Magazine's 100 most influential people in the world and recognized as one of USA Today's Women of the Century for her role in uncovering the Flint water crisis and leading recovery efforts. Most recently, she received the 2020 CDC Foundation's Fries Prize for improving health. So please join me in welcoming our guests. And without further ado, I'll turn the mic over to Yemisi to get this conversation started.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Sandy. And I just want to say that I am really excited to be here and to be having this conversation with Dr. Mona, because I know we have all kind of heard, whispers in the background, or there are those of us who may know a little bit more. And so just really getting to know you and your story has really been exciting. And so I'm excited for everyone who's here to also know just your role and really how impactful all the work that you have done is and continues to be. So welcome again, and thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you.
As well. So one of the things that I found really interesting, and Sandy touched on this in her intro, is really about the impact of individuals on their communities, right? And, before we get into the details, one of the things that I wanted to talk with you about, because you make mention of it, and it is really important that part of the community pediatrics program, one of the things you wanted to make sure was essential and was imparted on residents was really understanding the community. So I'm hoping you'll speak with us just a little bit, just to paint a picture for us on the Flint community, what it is that you hope residents learn and are inspired by in Flint. So if you could share with us the Flint community and the Flint spirit.
Oh, I would love to. Thank you. That's a beautiful question. But first, I want to say hi to everybody. It's great to be here. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you, Yemisi and Sandy. I feel like we're besties. I wish I could jump out and give you a hug. Thank you for your warmth and enthusiasm and the organization, and for everybody at i.c.stars. It's just great to be here with all of you. So the Flint community, and I love talking about Flint, and for so many people, when they think about Flint, they're like, oh, water crisis, all these problems, disinvestment, like poverty, like the list goes on, and they think all these negative things when they think about Flint. And what I hope to share in my book and my story is really the exact opposite. Like, yeah, Flint has a lot of that stigma attached to it. But when you get to know the city, when you get to know the people in the city, it's a city that's hard not to fall in love with. And that's actually a direct quote from our former lieutenant governor, who probably had never, been to the city of Flint until the water crisis. And then once he was in the water crisis and started working in recovery, he's like, this is a special place. And I felt that specialness several decades ago when I was first in Flint as a medical student. So I went to school at Michigan State University for medical school, and it's the very first community-based medical school in the country. So the whole point of the medical school was for you to be in a community, get ingrained into that community, and practice and learn medicine there. So that's where I did my clinical training as a medical student. And it didn't take long for me to pick up on that spirit, the spirit of resilience, the spirit, this pride, this loyalty, this gratitude, this drive that you see in almost everybody you meet from Flint. And that spirit comes a lot from Flint's history. And I'm going to try to be brief, but I'm a big fan of history, and something I teach my students and my residents. Like, it is impossible for us to treat a patient or to understand a complex problem, or to figure out how to move forward without starting by looking back. And Flint's history, it needs to be understood, just like every community that we are privileged to live in. We walk over a history every day, and as a country, we do a really good job closing our eyes to history, but we need to understand that history, come to some sort of reckoning with that history to really understand that community. And Flint's history is this place of extremes, almost like where greed met solidarity, where bigotry met fairness, and where the struggle for equality has played out really across the nation and so much of that happened in Flint. Flint was the birthplace of cars, and then subsequently, because of unions, was the birthplace of the middle class in America. And then, like so many cities, suffered from racism and disinvestment and and white flight and all the kind of, the ailments that come when a corporation abandons its birthplace, and where those with the power and privilege also leave that city. But the folks that have stayed in Flint, they have stuck through the highs and the lows, and they continue to believe in a better tomorrow. And I think I'm going to end kind of how I kind of feel about this, the spirit of the community, by sharing a logo that a Flint member suggested that we use for one of our big IT projects called the Flint Registry. So all of the work that we do in Flint is done in partnership with community. We have community advisory boards, and we hire Flint residents, and we train them, and we build pipeline programs, and we have parent partner groups and youth advisory. Everything is done in partnership with community. And we were asking the Flint community, we're about to build this crazy informatics system, this technology system to identify folks who were exposed to the crisis and get them connected to services to improve their public health. What do you think the logo should be? What do you think the tagline should be? How should we share this resource? And a Flint resident mentioned the Sankofa bird, and I hadn't heard about it before. And he's like, this is what Flint is all about. This is what this registry is all about. It's this mythical African bird that is flying forward, yet looking back, and it's holding an egg in its mouth. So it's about a city that is always pushing ahead, always future driven, yet never forgetting the past and the injustices and the inequities that, have created the present. And the egg in the mouth is my favorite as a pediatrician, because it's all about the kids. It's all about continuously driving and striving to make sure that our kids have a better tomorrow than the yesterday was. So I think that bird really encapsulates the spirit of the city.
Wow. Well, thank you for that. I think that's a really powerful narrative and picture, right, that you paint of Flint. And so I think it's interesting, right, kind of given everything that you shared about Flint's history. So one of the things that I would like to do is understanding the place, right? Now we have a better understanding of the place, the people, and the spirit, right? Because you mentioned Flint, like many cities, experiences disinvestment and just all of the kinds of things that happen in urban and even rural spaces. So I'm curious, kind of given that history, if you would walk us through, for those of us who haven't been on the front lines, who don't have as much background on how exactly the events leading to the Flint water crisis, what does that mean? Why was it a crisis? How did it happen that there was this thing we call a crisis around water? What does that mean, and how did that impact the folks of Flint?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'll try to make this as audience participatory as I can. So any Michiganders out there, feel free to raise your hand or say anything in the chat. But anybody from Michigan, we hold up our hands, we share something with you guys over here. But we're a peninsula, right? This is Michigan, the Mitten State. And you guys tell me, what is Michigan surrounded by?
What?
Water. So it wasn't the water. So water, right? So we're surrounded by the Great Lakes, the largest source of fresh water in the world. 21% of the fresh water in the world is around Michigan. And here's Flint. So here's Detroit and Ann Arbor and Grand Rapids, and Chicago's over here. But here's Flint, kind of in the middle of the largest source of fresh water in the world. And for half a century, we were getting our water from the Great Lakes, from Lake Huron. We bought it from Detroit, but it was fresh, high quality, pre-treated water from the Great Lakes. And then in 2014, it was decided that water was now too expensive for the city of Flint. And these decisions were made by unelected, unaccountable officials. So, I shared a little bit about Flint's history, like, once this place of prosperity, and like not even that long ago, 1980s, Flint had the highest per capita income in the country. Like, can you believe it? Like, the people of Flint made the most money than any other city in the country in the 1980s. And then quickly, because of plants closing, disinvestment, population loss, and the census numbers that just came out, even more of a hemorrhage of people. So the city could no longer support its infrastructure, in addition to policies from the state that cut revenue sharing and all these policy things. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. All these things made Flint an almost bankrupt city and a city in crisis, similar to many cities throughout this nation. And so then we were taken over in 2011 by emergency managers. And I want to talk about this a tiny bit, because when people think about the Flint crisis, they think about it as water. But it was also a crisis of democracy. The people of Michigan voted down emergency managers. They said, we don't want these unelected, unaccountable officials running our cities. And there was a ballot measure and said, we don't want emergency managers. However, our legislature, which happens to be one of the most gerrymandered legislatures in the country, tweaked it, pushed it through, it was signed by the governor. And before you knew it, about half of the African-American population in our state was under emergency management, compared to 2% of our white population. So before we had any water story, national media was involved in Flint because it was just a democracy story. Like, this doesn't make sense in America, that these unelected, unofficial, unaccountable folks are taking over predominantly minority cities. But that was happening throughout our state. And it was these folks with the governor, with the state, that decided, in this kind of quest towards austerity, to cut costs, to change our water source. And that's what happened in April 2014. So it was under a state of broken down democracy, driven by austerity, no regard for science or public health, that our water source was changed. And it became a crisis because the change in our water source to the river, away from the Great Lakes, forgot or was missing an important ingredient called corrosion control. And that made the water super corrosive, so corrosive that it actually ate engine parts at a General Motors plant. So there's still one GM plant, and the car parts in that plant began to corrode from our drinking water. So guess what? General Motors was allowed to go back to the Great Lakes, but the people of Flint were literally told to relax.
Plant fell.
And so that corrosive water ate up our pipes. We have a lot of lead in our pipes, a lot of our water.
Well, I pulled the chair out before
I just muted that person. Sorry. Okay, it like came out of the water, and it came into it filled baby bottles and sippy cups, and that's why it became a crisis. It became a crisis of water quality, a crisis of water affordability. Our water rates were also super high, the highest in the nation. It also became a crisis of trust, and a crisis of science, and a crisis of what happens when that social contract between the people that are supposed to protect you and a vulnerable community is severed.
Mm-hmm. So just a point of clarity. So the initial justification, right, for switching the water source was to reduce cost. And if I heard you correctly, I just want to make sure that I'm really getting that the cost of water actually increased.
Yeah, so because Flint was in this kind of near bankruptcy state for so long, in this kind of fiscal crisis, the water rates were really high in the city. So it was kind of being used to pay for other services in the city. So water rates were high. People in Flint were actually paying the highest water rates in the whole country. Because of those high water rates, people couldn't afford to pay for their water. And there were shutoffs. So people's water was being shut off, liens on their houses because they couldn't pay. And the United Nations actually got involved, not only in Flint, but also in Detroit, because of the high number of water shutoffs because of water inaffordability. Once again, in the middle of the largest source of fresh water in the world, violating that human right to safe drinking water. As a doctor, like, water is a medical and public health necessity. We cannot survive without water. Yet for so many populations, they don't have, to this day, access to water. Fortunately, with COVID, many states put a moratorium on water shutoffs, but it continues to this day that people don't have access. So yes, they were paying expensive water for water that they should not have been drinking.
Wow, that's amazing. You said something a little bit earlier about kind of this really being about a breakdown in democratic process and justice, right? And that through kind of all of this that was happening, the people of Flint were told, hey, it's okay, don't worry, right? So I'm curious to know, especially as a doctor, right? Like, you are on the front lines along with the individuals of Flint, right? Who brought this water. Talk to me a little bit more about how you began to piece together, this message, is a reflection of this breakdown in democracy. Something is not consistent here. Talk to me about that experience and that process for you.
Yeah. So, for over a year, I, as a pediatrician, was caring for patients, as I continue to do in Flint. And, patients would come to me, parents would ask about the water, if it was safe, with questions like, when I bathe my baby always gets a rash, like right to the water line. And like, we're on a big push to, for people to drink more water rather than like soda or pop or sugar sweetened beverages. We have this childhood obesity epidemic. And they're like, are you sure I should be drinking water instead of pop or soda? And then, most tragically, new moms and dads would ask about infant formula, because you make infant formula by mixing powder with usually tap water. So, as a pediatrician for over a year, I was fielding these questions from parents who, like, in their gut, like, knew something was wrong, even though like everybody in charge was reassuring after every red flag, like, General Motors, like, finds its corroding engine parts or bacteria in the water or all these other problems. There was multiple reassurances from all these, bureaucrats and experts that the water was safe to drink. And I also kind of drank the Kool-Aid. So for a while, I was reassuring my patients that it was okay, because I was hearing those reassurances from the folks in charge. And then also, like, I was thinking in my head, like, wait a minute, like, this is America. Like, we are the richest country in the history of the world. Like, how, we've come a long way in our ability to deliver clean water. Like, literally, if you look at history, like, civilizations are built on the ability to kind of create drinking water infrastructure systems. And then I was thinking about Michigan. I'm like, wait, hold on, stop. Like, we're surrounded by fresh water. But then I also knew, like, I have a background in environmental health. Like, I also knew like there was rules and regulations and policies and laws and there was people that our tax dollars pay that go to work to make sure that if you live in Flint or Detroit or Chicago or whatever, where you turn on your tap, your water is safe. So that was kind of what was going through my head for about a year, and, very much with my white coat on and my doctor confidence, reassuring my patients. And that completely changed for me when I heard about the possibility of lead being in the water. From the moment I heard that there could be lead in the water, literally, that's when my life changed. And as a scientist, as a pediatrician, I know what lead does. It is evil. It is toxic. There's no safe level. It's a form of environmental racism. Like, we now know that there's no safe level of lead. And so when I heard about that possibility, all those reassurances stopped. And kind of that's what pushed me to figure out like what is going on, what is happening to our kids, and to do that data-driven research, to put kind of science and facts and evidence to bring that forth to figure out what was happening with the crisis.
Okay. So I do want to, I'm kind of stepping off the road here a bit, but someone did just ask, and you were mentioning about the lead, and this was more of a specific question about media reports of testing lead water samples being under 15 parts per billion over the past 5 years. They're asking, is this accurate or is it misinformation? And I thought this was kind of a good point to really address that as we talk about the lead. And as you said, there are no safe levels.
Yeah, so let's go over some lead levels. So there's the EPA set something called the maximum contaminant level goal for lead in water, which is like the maximum amount of lead that should be in water. And that's set at 0 parts per billion. So there should not be any lead in water, respecting that there's no safe level of lead. But that's not an enforceable standard. So there's some other levels to keep in mind. The American Academy of Pediatrics, so like my professional body, has recommended an action level of 1 part per billion of lead in water, especially in schools and childcare facilities. The FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, has an action level for lead in water in bottled water. They regulate bottled water, and that's set at 5 parts per billion. The EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, has an action level for lead in water at 15 parts per billion. It's not a health-based action level. It's just a level really kind of compliance. So there's different levels that you'll hear about. Once again, there's no safe level of lead. Our goal should be 0. So during the Flint water crisis, we had lead levels in the hundreds, the thousands, and the tens of thousands of parts per billion. There was a home, I remember, with a lead level of 22,000 parts per billion. Shortly after I went public with my research, we switched back to Great Lakes water. So amazing. We thought was impossible. We went back to Great Lakes water. But when the EPA folks finally came in, there and they examined kind of our pipes, they said it was as if we were drinking through lead painted straws. Like the pipes had corroded so much that you never knew when a piece of lead scale was going to come off those pipes, go into the drinking water and into the bodies of our children. So that's why to this day, our pipes are being replaced. We're almost done. I think this is like the last month of our pipe replacement program. But ever since kind of switching back to Great Lakes water, increasing the amount of corrosion control treatments, our testing citywide is much better. So yeah, I think for the last 3 or 5 years, our lead levels have been as a city within compliance. However, the precautions are still in place to use filtered or bottled water because of the infrastructure work that's happening. And this is where the lessons of Flint will soon be national lessons as we talk about the national infrastructure work that's about to happen. When you are digging a pipe or doing road work or doing anything that's like shaking the ground, it has the potential to displace lead scales on the pipe and increase lead release. So because we are doing the citywide infrastructure work, replacing all the lead pipes in the city, that's the reason that the precautions are still in place. Yes, our lead levels have come down a lot. They're within compliance, but because we are moving the earth a lot, people still have to have the precautions of using filters and bottled water. A little wonky, so sorry if that was too much. But it's important because soon we're going to be, cross our fingers, replacing our nation's lead pipes. Right, and whenever pipe work happens, people need to be extra cautious and use filters.
Good. I'm glad that you're sharing that, particularly as you said with the infrastructure bill coming and the initiative for lead abatement. One of the things that I would like for us to explore, because when we first met, one of the things we shared about i.c.stars and i.c.stars folk, right, the i.c.stars family, is this notion of the geek, right, and kind of geeking out on wherever, right, whatever that is for you. And obviously listening to you, you have a breadth of knowledge for a number of
I'm a
things.
geek. I'm a geek. Do I get like a geek badge? I am.
Welcome to
am
the
part of
family. But one of the things I wanted to explore with you, because I think that sometimes we can become in our silos, right? And you get on your mission for a certain thing, and we don't think about the interconnectivity of the work that we do and how important it is. And you mentioned earlier on about data, and I think one thing that people may not realize is really the role of data. So can you talk to us a little bit about the role data played in really exposing kind of what was happening, but then probably most importantly is ensuring that what you presented could not be refuted or dismissed. So can you talk with us about the role of data in this?
Yeah, no, that's an awesome question. So I am a data geek. Like I had a Palm Pilot, like when they first came out. Like I am a huge fan of technology, always trying to be like a first early adopter of whatever's out there. When my hospital system went electronic, implementing the electronic medical record, I was like one of the trainers and one of the early champions. So I definitely have embraced kind of the role of technology and data to solve problems. So many folks, especially in medicine, they see it as, oh, one more thing we have to do. But I've always seen it as a way for us to, decrease variability, to improve care, to address population health, to reduce errors. So there's so many benefits that I've seen, for the use of data and technology and the integration of that. So when I heard that there was lead in water, I'm like, oh my gosh, is this, we already have the data and science out there that there is lead in water. Like that was being publicly, transparently shared by incredible water scientists who were being dismissed and denied, and their data, their science wasn't being respected. And so I'm like, oh my gosh, like I shouldn't have to, but I need to prove that kids are in harm's way. I need that data. I've always, in my kind of experience, if it was like advocating for certain types of clinics or changes to resident work hours, like I knew that I couldn't win an argument without data. So I'm like, I need the data that our kids are in harm's way. And I knew that as pediatricians, we check blood levels of children. It's something that we do routinely at checkups at the ages of 1 and 2. So, but I'm like, I'm just one pediatrician in one clinic. Like, I can't tell you what's happening at a population level. That's the difference between medicine and public health. And there's often big silos that, make it hard for those two disciplines to communicate. But I knew that blood levels are something that we do surveillance on. All the data on blood levels go to the state and to the county health departments. And there's people whose job is like to track and trend and collect that data. So that's the first thing I try to do. I'm like, give me that data, give me that surveillance data so I can tell what's happening to a population. But there was like roadblocks all over and that didn't let me get that data. So then I got that data from my own hospital medical record system. We are a children's hospital. We see most of the patients in county. We process a lot of the labs. So literally within hours after making that request, obviously going through all the research protections and IRB approvals and what have you, I was able very quickly to get all the data, all the blood levels of children that were processed through my hospital. And then the kind of working hand in hand with, my friends who are statisticians and we analyzed that data, and it was really easy data analysis. Like we looked at blood levels before the water crisis, we compared them to blood levels after, and there was an increase. And then this is where we partnered with another discipline that we don't usually partner with. I partnered with geographers, GIS experts, and we were able to, pinpoint where people lived and what their water source was. And we overlaid that with water lead levels. And we noticed like, hey, in the areas where the water lead levels are the highest, we see the greatest increase in children's lead levels. And we also had data outside the city, and outside the city, there was no change. So it was this kind of awesome application of data that enabled us to prove that our kids, once again, were in harm's way. So it was, I often say it was our science that spoke truth to power, but coupled with that data was storytelling. And this is something I try to bring home to my kind of scientist students. I can share data up the wazoo, and I can show you bar graphs and p-values and all this stuff. And that works for some people. That probably works for all of us. But sometimes we also have to add a level of storytelling and add a bit of that human. So when I bring in kind of stories of patients or what this data means, and for me, I always try to ground myself in the data. Like for me, every number is not a number, it's a kid, like it's a patient, it's a child. And that's like, that's why I go to work. And that's what, that's my why, it's those children. So it's also kind of taking a step back and realizing like, what do your numbers mean? And what are you willing to risk for those numbers?
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing. I'm wondering also, because you did mention, and I'm probably going to botch this all up, but there were a number of iterations. Some of it you alluded to with collaborating with GIS folks. Can you just share a little bit more about how you had to work to kind of fine tune that data? And, at one point you're looking at one set of data numbers or time frame, and how that had to be really refined to tell, as you say, to really tell the story and not just the numbers.
Yeah, there was many. I think for any of us who've worked with a data set, as we get more and more kind of ingrained in that data set, and as we learn more about kind of that subject area, there's opportunities for refinement and, looking at things different ways. So we tried, we ran our numbers, by year, and we ran them by seasons, and we ran them by kids under the age of 6, and we ran them not only by zip code, but once again we geocoded every kid. So I think I was driven by kind of not wanting to be right. Like I did not want to find what I found. Like I wanted to be wrong. I did not want to see an increase in children's lead levels. So we tried to look at this in so many different ways, and we also knew that we were gonna get attacked, nothing, and there's no way I could have predicted the level of attack, but we also knew, but we knew this was political, right? Like we knew that there was already resistance, and that everybody who had spoken up about the water, the moms, the pastors, the activists, the journalists, the water science, everybody had been dismissed. So we knew that our data and our science had to be right, and that kind of pushed these different iterations of the data analysis to make sure, to double check, to triple check, to run it this way and to run it that way, and to have another set of eyes look at it, to make sure that we were right, because it had a lot of gravity. And another reason we did all that is, in academia, in medicine, when you're working with data, when you do research, you often share that number, those numbers, that research gets shared in publications and in conferences, and in journals. It goes through that vetted peer review process. And my research was shared at a press conference, and that's not what doctors do. And I knew because of that way, that what we were doing, there was also going to be some pushback. So we knew we had to be right.
Yeah, I just think, I think you're amazing. I think this, so I just have to interject.
You're everybody's amazing. Thank you.
So I think what I would like to do is also now just kind of sprinkle in questions coming in from the chat, if that's okay with you as well.
Yeah.
Okay. So one question we have
For some
is
reason,
around...
my cat wants to say hi too. Hi, say hi. He's like meowing real loud. Okay.
How much pricier was the water, I guess, as opposed to surrounding states?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't remember the exact number, but it was like $200 to $300 a bill. I don't remember what the bill cycle was, but it was very, very high, especially considering that this was the level of poverty in the community. Flint has about a near 70% rate of child poverty. This was not a city that could afford these, exorbitant water rates. And that compounded the problem because the water was so expensive. People were obviously conserving the water, right? Like if your water's a lot, you're not going to run your water all the time. And that's the exact opposite thing you're supposed to do with a lead issue in water. When you have lead in water, you're supposed to flush the water. You're supposed to run it all the time, not all the time, but a lot, especially if you haven't been in the home for a while. And in the early morning, you're supposed to flush that water. But nobody was flushing that water because it was so expensive.
So another question we have is dealing with around kind of national lessons, right? What have we learned from this experience? And the question is asking, one, how has this become a part of a larger dialogue? I think we've kind of touched some of that on the infrastructure bill, but I think we can kind of dig deeper. And then the second part to this question, which I think is a really great forward-looking, is there anything that we're missing collectively? Is there further action that's needed as we look forward, right?
Yeah, those are great questions. And, I think there's probably 4 big lessons from Flint. And I think they're just so timely with the pandemic because they're the same lessons. And, the first lesson is this kind of notion of good governance that values public health. So that was absent in Flint under this bizarre emergency management rule that was kind of driven by austerity and disregard of public health. And I think we can see some resonance, especially kind of in the early phases of the pandemic. So one of the big lessons is good governance. And I think another big lesson that we learned in Flint is the role of science and science denial and the respect of science, and how important it is to have science at the table, to have scientists at the table, to incorporate science and decision making. That was lost in Flint, the water science and lead science and the voices of scientists. And I don't think I need to tell you how that's kind of being played out in the pandemic, but it was also, also climate change and the anti-vaccine movement and what have you. So, there has been this long-standing, purposeful kind of installation of doubt in science and facts and truth, and it's there's a lot of reasons why. A recent book I read from a friend of mine is called The Triumph of Doubt. He's a professor at George Washington who's kind of an expert on the sugar industry and the lead industry and all these different industries that have purposefully instilled doubt in science and scientists and attacked scientists for kind of corporate profit because of their and to minimize regulations. So Flint was a kind of a lesson of what the consequences of science denial. I think another big kind of national repercussion of Flint is the role and the recognition that, infrastructure impacts public health. So, our deteriorating, pipes, roads, bridges, broadband, the list goes on, all these things that are infrastructure that the nation hasn't invested in decades can hurt people. Deteriorating infrastructure hurts people, especially when it's infrastructure that's made of a poison. So, that has been a national conversation now. The last time I testified before Congress was just a few months ago, and it was about President Biden's national water infrastructure bill that includes eliminating all the lead pipes in the country. So you guys tell me, which city has the most lead pipes in the whole country?
Did
you say Chicago? You win. Chicago has the most lead pipes in the whole country. So lead pipes, lead service lines were banned in 1986, and most communities stopped putting them in post-war, except Chicago. Chicago was still putting them in 1986, and there was actually kind of in code, in real estate code, it was mandated if you wanted water from the water line, you had to use a lead pipe. So Chicago does have the highest density, the most lead pipes in the country. The majority of lead pipes are in the Midwest and then the Northeast. And this gets back to Sandy's question of like, why is lead bad? We've known lead is bad for literally centuries. This theory is that hypothesized the demise of the Roman Empire was because they used so much lead in plumbing, but also like in food, which is a bad idea. But there's a long history of lead's toxicity. It's probably the oldest and most well-studied neurotoxins. It impacts thinking, cognition, it lowers IQ levels, it impacts behavior, leads to things like attention problems and focusing problems, learning problems. It leads to criminality and violent behavior. Kids exposed to lead as adults can have things like high blood pressure and cardiovascular disease, and as seniors can have things like Alzheimer's and early dementia. So every new research paper is something bad about lead. And it's because of this incredible science over the last, especially 30 years, that we've been able to have stronger regulations that have limited the use of lead. But we as a nation were very slow to listen to that science, both for lead in plumbing, but lead in paint and lead in gasoline is another long story. We allowed the unchecked use of this poison for the benefits of industry and profit without making sure that they were safe. So lead, so what was it? So infrastructure. So yes, the national repercussion is we're finally looking at infrastructure and investing in updating and putting cleaner, safer, healthier infrastructure and getting people high paying union jobs to do that work. And then I would say the last kind of repercussion of Flint, or another national lesson, has kind of been the story of inequities, which now as a nation we're paying more attention to. Flint never would have happened in a richer or wider community. It is this case of environmental injustice. It put the phrase environmental injustice into the lexicon of America. It was there. It's been there for decades. But Flint put it forefront. There's been several investigations, including the Michigan Civil Rights Commission, and the list goes on. But now there's this national focus on environmental justice. The EPA now has a robust growing division on environmental justice. It's a conversation piece. It's part of our climate change proposals. So there's many kind of repercussions, lessons kind of Flint that are playing out at a national level. But I think kind of the most direct is the removal of lead pipes, which is almost going to happen.
Wow. Yeah. I think what you said about voices at the table, right, kind of being a very big lesson. And one of the things that I appreciate about, your approach and the work you're doing, and even as you mentioned, the work and the relationship, right, of people in Flint, is this crossroads, right? We talked about crossroads of data, technology, and community, right? Making sure that all voices are at the table, right, to get to that answer, right? I think is pretty powerful. So I think one of the things as we kind of wind down, that I would like to kind of share, well, not share, but ask rather, right? The view, right, as you kind of look back over this whole experience, we live in a place, as you mentioned, right, where the breakdown in democracy, as much as we might like to think, is probably more common, right,
Yep.
than not. And so I think that had you made a different choice, right, to turn a blind eye, because I think people do, right, at some time turn a blind eye because it takes a lot of work, it takes a lot of courage, it's taxing, as you mentioned, dealing with in your book, just how it changed your family dynamic and your ability to be there, how you were before. Can you talk to me and just share with us a little bit about why you decided to not take the easy road? Why did you make this decision? Because it wasn't easy, and it wasn't going to be easy for anyone kind of tied to you more closely. So talk to us about that courage to step out and why you made that decision.
Oh, that's a beautiful question. And, that's why the title of my book is What the Eyes Don't See. And it's exactly what you talked about. It's this blindness that we have to certain problems or people or, places. So many people close their eyes to Flint. Oh, that's their problem. That's over there. They don't look like me. They probably created their own problem. Blame the victim. Like that's I got other issues I got to deal with. And it's about this power that we all have within us to open our eyes to injustices that are happening everywhere. I wrote this book not to tell you about Flint, but to tell you that there's Flints everywhere. There's places that we have closed our eyes to and people that we have closed our eyes to everywhere. And that when we do, open our eyes and kind of wake to these injustices, we have this power to make a difference. So for me, that choice the choice to see and that choice to do, I've often said it was a choiceless choice. Like there was no choice. There was only going forward when I heard the word lead. Once again, because I know what lead does. I know what it could do. Like, as a pediatrician, so much of my job is taking care of that kid in front of me, like making sure they're healthy today. But it's more than that. It's about making sure that that kid has the brightest future tomorrow and and beyond that. Yet there was something in our water that was literally threatening their tomorrows. So I could not sit back. I could not in 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years live with the regret of that I could have done something and I didn't, that I was silent to an injustice that was happening and I couldn't do anything about it. So like, why? I don't know why. And I think that's why I wrote this book. Like I tried to ask myself, like, why did you do this? Like what part of you like made that a choiceless choice? And I think there's a lot of parts. It's partly that doctor oath, but that's not completely. It's about the oath that we've all taken. It's part of our civic responsibility, doctor or not, to speak up and to stand up and to care, especially for the most vulnerable among us. And I think kind of incorporated in my story is also that immigrant perspective. Like, I wasn't born here. I came to this country when I was 4. Like, I'm just this, I am a recipient of that American dream. I came from somewhere bad, Iraq, to somewhere better for freedom and democracy and opportunity. And I want you to think about me when you look at those pictures of those little Afghan girls right now. Like, we came here for that. And I was a recipient of that. And that made me grow up in a way of being every day grateful to be in this country, but also committed to service. And it almost, that immigrant perspective almost gave me this like heightened antenna for injustice, like being more keenly aware of what vulnerable populations could be going through. So I think it's a combination of all these things that made me do what I did, very much ingrained in this value system, as a kid, that you do the right things, no matter how hard they are. And that was kind of passed down through oral history and family stories and kind of being a consummate, reader and all these different things that made me able to be in other people's shoes. Mm-hmm. So not one answer, but definitely kind of a take home of my story in this book is that, we all have the power to open our eyes and to see the injustices once again that are all over and to make a difference. And I know our time is short, and I'm going to end with my favorite quote, which kind of sums it up. It's in the beginning of the book. It's from another doctor who said, "Unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better. It's not." So that was Dr. Seuss from the Lorax.
Yeah, amazing. Well, all of those things together that drove you, we thank you. I thank you. And I think we probably need to have a part 2.
That went by fast.
Yeah,
For
yeah.
sure, we need a part 2.
So I'm gonna hand it back over to Sandy. And again, thank you so much. I mean, this has been really amazing. And I'm just appreciative to be able to sit and have this conversation with you.
Thank you.
Indeed. Can everybody just turn their mics on for a second so we could properly clap, because that was awesome. So turn your mics on, so just so we can get some claps. Yay! Oh my gosh, no, Dr. Mona, you are fantastic. You know, so many gems you left with us today, and so many things to think about. But I think more than anything, you inspired us to act. And your actions have impacted so many, and so many more generations to come. And you know, infrastructure impacts public health for sure. And I think you really brought that home. And just like your Palm Pilot back in the day, oh my gosh, I remember that. Remember our Palm Pilots, you guys? Like, so we enjoyed geeking out with you. And just like when you started talking about data, we all lit up. Like, we are your geeky cousins, and we appreciate so much the work that you're doing, and the way that you're using data and information to really make change. I think that's what it's all about. So, you know, at i.c.stars, we have a way, we always say, you got to learn something, you've got to teach something, and then do something. And you embody that spirit. And so we're just so grateful for you joining us today. And so I want to thank you, Dr. Mona, for being awesome, for inspiring all of us. Yemisi, I want to thank you for being an artful facilitator. Oh my gosh, you're like a great moderator. You need to take this show on the road and have a TV show.
Oprah.
Right?
Chicago, right?
Yeah, right. Legacy.
I hear that space is Oprah's old space is open. So
oh, I'll go check it out.
I also want to thank Jan Ann Dubin and Mary Ellen Woods for really spearheading this whole initiative, and having the brilliant idea, Mary Ellen, to do this and to find all these amazing speakers to inspire us and geek out with us. And then I also want to thank Amanda and Caroline for pulling this together and providing the technical expertise. And lastly, I want to thank you for all being here and learning something with us on a Monday afternoon. So go do something. And last big thought was, I love the bird metaphor. And Dr. Mona, that's you, like, right? Like in the past, in the future, and holding our children in your beak, so fragile. Awesome. You rock.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Be safe.
You too.
Bye.